You've likely heard the rumor that Total War is making a Warhammer 40K video game. Nothing has been announced, but everyone says it's coming. Yet many of you feel 40K is a bad fit. You can't see how it could possibly be adapted to Total War. So in this video, I'm going to show you how it could be done. The first thing to know is that this would be a 40K flavored Total War game, not another tabletop simulator. Most of the comments against this game largely boil down to 40K tabletop is small squad-based combat. And it is, but the lore surrounding those battles has hundreds of thousands of combatants involved and implied. For most rules and unit types on the tabletop, there's already an analog somewhere in Total War's catalog. They may not be one-to-one translations, but they weren't for Warhammer Fantasy either, and that's been a smash hit. When imagining how to build a Total War game, I find it helps to think like a modder, since most Total War games are built on the same engine and are variations on their existing assets tweaked to fit a new setting. For 40K, there's already systems in place for melee, shooting, artillery, magic, and vehicles, so we're well on our way to a space game. One thing that has to be added, though, is a decent cover system. A primitive version of this existed in Empire Total War, but here it would need some serious tweaking to be passable in 2025. Ironically, the much maligned Empire Total War is also the best foundation for a 40K game, with its destructible buildings, theaters of war, and naval combat. Spaceship combat in 40K works much like old ships of the line, with cannon broadsides from the big ships and tiny ships swarming around them as a fighter or bomber to pepper away their health and fight each other. Cannons were always the best part of ship combat in Total War games, and this is a chance to show that system off again. Always remember that the original creators of Warhammer were history nerds, and you can see that influence throughout 40K in its battles. Now, for adaptation, I would expect this to be 2D battles. 1, because they're easier for players to interact with, and 2, a 2D naval battle system already exists in Total War. The scale of the campaign map you'd be fighting over is one of the biggest points of contention. The small-scale campaign version is what we've seen in games like Dawn of War and Gladius, with the entire campaign typically confined to a single planet or continent. We've seen this with Total War Warhammer, but it doesn't capture the immense scale of space in 40K, and there's only so many intergalactic species and factions you can shove onto a single planet before it gets a bit silly. Instead, you could base it on the current city and provinces system in Total War, and you could easily make each planet a city and their star system a province, sort of like what you've seen for Star Wars Empire at War or Stellaris. Each province of space would have a varying number of planets in it. These planets would specialize in producing a certain thing. There are hive worlds, agricultural worlds, and manufacturing worlds. Hive worlds supply people, agricultural worlds supply the food necessary to support your armies, and manufacturing worlds provide heavy weapons, armaments, tanks, etc. There's even special mining planets that provide unique resources that could be necessary to build certain ships or units, giving you extra impetus to fight over specific sectors, similar to the mechanism we see in Total War Troy. You add variety to your battle maps by giving each planet a set climate. Ice world, jungle world, desert world, hive world. If you're fighting a battle to take the planet, that's what generates that map style. Capital planets could also build citadels, so you'd have to fight a siege battle to take the capital planet. Again, another existing system. Using a 40K lore term, these star systems are then contained within subsectors, which make up a sector, which are part of segmentums, because space is big, folks, but we still have to find a way to adapt it. Rough math says that 5 planets or moons per system, with 5 systems per subsector, and then 5 subsectors per sector, with 5 sectors per segmentum. That's 625 planets in the game to cover a single segmentum, of which there are 5 throughout the known universe of 40K, which I would point out, those 625 planets is just slightly more than the total number of cities already in the Immortal Empires campaign, and equivalent to the medium galaxy size in Stellaris, so it's not like there's too many to cover. Personally though, I think segmentums should be a bit smaller, as even 300 planets would be a huge number to cover, and it would allow the game to add more segmentums with incoming races later alongside their invasions, letting these areas emerge from warp storms to reveal new threats to face. Each segmentum could act as a theater of war like we saw in Empire Total War, which lets you jump between these different maps, and it avoids you flying across huge distances of empty space and makes the whole game feel bigger because of it. Warp storms could even be a gameplay feature on the map, blocking off sections of travel and isolating regions. By the same idea, warp currents would act as roads across space. You move along them for faster speed, but they move and twist and turn and aren't always in the same place. And getting across the entire galaxy could be done with warp gates. We've seen the same idea with sea lanes in Immortal Empires, and here, when you enter a warp gate, you would then pop out across the galaxy at your destination 2 to 6 turns later. And I give it a randomization there because warp travel is irregular, and you could even possibly add a battle encounter with demons every time you try and use the gates. Because one of the keys here is this should not try and do the 3-game super deal again for a combined map. Porting assets between Warhammers 1, 2, and 3 was a nightmare for CA, with drooping sales and performance between games that grew notably worse with reviews by the end. These days, it's much more common to create a single game and then dedicate long-term support for it through DLC. And a 40K game could easily see 5 years of continuous DLC every few months, thanks to the many chapters of Space Marines and their Chaos counterparts. Now that we have a universe in place, let's talk about who should populate it and why on day 1. Following the format established by every historical game and Warhammer Fantasy, you'd expect 4 factions to choose from, each with 2 army chapters represented for a total of 8 playable faction options. That's been the formula for some time now, and any less than that would smack of shrinkflation. Cutting down to 3 factions or even only 1 chapter of an army would remove huge chunks of game time and replayability. So the 4 races you could put at the start are Space Marines, Chaos Marines, and Imperial Guard, also called the Astra Militarum, with either the Orcs or Tyranids as the 4th starting race. Which one we get for the 4th faction is really a question of popularity. Which is more likely to sell games and align with Games Workshop's current marketing and thematic push? Well, currently, that's Tyranids. And in the world of video games, players are already more familiar with a bug race enemy, as they're the inspiration for the Zerg in StarCraft. Total War could try and lock one of those factions behind a pre-order, which is exceedingly obnoxious, and considering the current state of opinion on their company, anyone that suggests that should be punted right out a window. Warriors of Chaos were nearly unplayable in Warhammer 1, Norska is still crap to this day, and Ogres are easily the worst faction in Warhammer 3. With a track record like that, it's time to know when to quit doing pre-order factions. How would these factions play? When you think of Space Marines, they're elite warriors who are always on the move. Their units should be expensive and fewer in number compared to the likes of the Guard or Greenskins. We're talking a 10-man squad of Space Marines, with Terminator squads of only 5, which sounds extremely low, but we've already seen experiments with this in Total War Warhammer, with Ogres fielding fewer, more powerful units. Rattling Gunners also give a good idea of how Terminator squads would work in battle. Slow, steady, and shooty, pivoting on a fixed point and hosing an area with lead. Space Marines and Chaos Marines would both be semi-horde factions, floating around the galaxy on their giant starships. They have a home planet and a home base spaceship, but they never settle or fully control any location after taking it. That's where the Imperial Guard comes in. See, most planets aren't inhabited by Space Marines or their Dark Emo brothers. They're just human hab worlds with planetary defense forces on them. Put another way, you have to fill all these planets up with something, and Space Marines are basically wandering knights, so you wouldn't expect to fight them on every single world. The PDF, or Planetary Defense Force, is the equivalent of the US National Guard, and would have much the same equipment as the Astra Militarum, so you wouldn't need extra models to implement them. Corrupted PDF, or Traitor Guard, are very common in the lore and are the Chaos equivalent of the Astra Militarum. And by the same token, somebody has to fill up those Chaos planets. Trader Guard have never gotten separate rules on the tabletop, but you can see how they'd slot in to fill a specific needed role here. While an argument can be made that Space Marines and Imperial Guard could be the same faction, their playstyles differ significantly and their lore command structures are very much separate. The Imperial Guard, for the unaware, is the human space army, every bit the traditional Total War faction. They throw lots of bodies at a problem, Starship Troopers style, and make up for their lack of physical abilities with cannons and combined weapons assaults. There's even been a long-standing rumor of a World War I Total War game in the works, and if that's true, the Imperial Guard would be an almost one-to-one port of tactics, weapons, and animations. And somewhere in all of this, there's a fun mechanic about falling to chaos. Chaos Marines are known for their cultists and acolytes, and sending these agents out to corrupt a planet and cause a Trader Guard uprising sounds cool and fun. It would work a bit like Skaven corruption, where once it reaches a certain point, you can spawn an army and take over the planet. And this would give Chaos Marines their own pocket vassal faction and further separate their campaign from the Space Marines. Greenskins or Tyranids are the token Xeno race. While many of you may want Eldar here, there is a need for a monstrous infantry to fight against. Tyranids don't colonize, they devour a planet's biomass and then use it to create more units and then move on their Leviathan fleets. And now that I've said that aloud, it actually may be the reason the Greenskins are the starting race and not them, as Tyranids would just be another horde, and they also work cooperatively with the Gene Stealer cults, who wouldn't be in the game to begin with either. The fungal infection from hell there's Greenskins play more like a traditional faction for Total War, with home worlds they spread out from. There's also the fun detail that even when they've been driven off a world, their greenskin spores can hatch years later and cause another greenskin uprising. Big, loud, and angry, they're the most iconic enemy in 40k, and make sense as the traditional space enemy to fight against. And yes, I just changed my mind in the middle of the video. I think Greenskins should be the fourth race. Based on all that information, these are the factions and lords I would make on day one. For Space Marines, we know one of them would be Ultramarines. The Smurfs are the poster boys of 40k after all, but which lord will lead them comes down to a gameplay choice on power levels. Primarchs have been returning to the tabletop, but they're walking gods, and not every faction has their equivalent, leading to wild imbalances between them. I would put them as an advisor for your faction. Let Guilliman talk to you and assign missions as you play as a field commander. In this case, the Ultramarines Marneus Calgar. He has a unique silhouette and giant punching fists. I mean, what else could you want in a leader? How about more fists? Typically, Total War offers at least 2 options per faction, but with Space Marines, this means adding additional units and decorations that quickly can balloon a budget. So the other faction needs to be Codex compliant, to use a lore term, and more accurately here, be the easiest to implement as a recolor of Ultramarines with a slightly different playstyle. Blood Angels, Raven Guard, and Dark Angels are certainly more popular chapters, but they also require more unique assets and mechanics to bring to life. So we have Imperial Fists, ladies and gentlemen. The bunker building Banana Boys focus on sieges, heavy armor, and shooting, making them just different enough from Ultramarines to feel unique, but not so different that they require lots of work to implement. I would focus more on the Greek-inspired heavy armor formations, like how the Ultramarines are inspired by Roman iconography, and focus less on the Imperial Fist's Glove of Pain lore fluff nonsense. For Chaos Marines, the Black Legion is the most likely, as they're Chaos Undivided, sort of the bog-standard Chaos counterpart to Ultramarines. They're led by Abaddon, an uber-angry and powerful lord sworn to nobody who may be a clone of his founding Primarch. Because let's be honest here, I would love to see 4 different Chaos factions aligned with the god at the game's launch, but with 16,000 layoffs across the gaming industry in the last year, that ain't gonna happen. So picking an undivided faction makes the most sense. Much like with Ultramarines, the second faction needs to look and feel similar enough that they can be a color swap and reskin. There are countless second founding undivided legions that could fit the bill, but including a second founding chapter at the start of a game is a bit like including Helman Gorst. Personally, I think it should be the Word Bearers. They're first founding, similar art style, and still worship the general concept of chaos in an undivided fashion. Personality-wise, They're zealots and lean into the conversion aspect of chaos. Essentially, a bunch of Warhammer Fantasy warrior priests in space. They're to encourage the spread of chaos. They would be headed by Erebus, and like the Ultramarines who get missions from their Primarch, might receive some dark whispers across the void from their patron Primarch. Though there are rumors that Lorgar has returned from the Chaos Realm. I mean, maybe Primarchs could be a Green Knight-esque summon, or only appear in dire situations, like when you wake them up from a nap when their fortress is being attacked. Having said that, I would love to see Primarchs added eventually in an interesting manner, or even better, have their own Horus Heresy game. When it comes to the Imperial Guard, it's most likely Cadia, because everyone knows them. It's just a question of which creed will lead them. The fall of Cadia is a great inciting incident that is well known across all Warhammer lore. For the second Guard faction, the most iconic is the death corpse of Krieg. But 40K still has a big enough Nazi problem that I personally wouldn't include them at the start. No need to court controversy when they can be brought into an established game later. Instead, I would do Arcadian Leontis, the current Lord Commander Solar. 1, because he's a golden swordsman on the back of a mechanical horse, and 2, because he starts on Earth and is the head of the military in the Sol system, which gives him an obvious loreful starting position, a recognizable touchstone for Total War players in Earth, and very cool distinct armor. Together, those add enough cool points to earn him second billing, but as he's technically the leader of the entire Guard for the Sol system, the Valhallans would make for a nice alternative. I'm a sucker for the Blackadder-inspired humor of the Caiaphas Cain books, and having a Guard unit that specializes in frozen planet fighting opens up other fun possibilities for adapted regiments going forward. Jungle fighters, desert fighters, there's a Guard regiment for all of these. For greenskins, the most popular are Goths, led by the warlord Gazkul Thraka. They're big and wear black armor with checks on them and are all about going in hard with shock assaults. For the second faction, I would go with Evil Sons, as the joke of painting something red to make it go faster is infinitely humorous, and a fast-moving speedy faction would help to widen the playstyles on offer here. The Evil Sons are red and yellow after all and specialize in mind-melting speeds of nitrous-infused nonsense. Now you may be wondering, why bother with all these sub-factions? Why not just make them Orcs and Space Marines and that's it, where all the chapters can be fielded by a single faction? Because the universe of 40K is big, and each chapter and sub-faction have their own nuances and playstyles. Too many 40K adaptation games lump them all together and ignore this and move on, never reveling in the spectacle of size and scale that this property has to offer. And for me, that's how you make a 40K game for Total War. Is it a perfect replica of the tabletop? Of course not, but the tabletop already exists, and this is an adaptive work. So let's lean into these big battles described in the army books, lore, and novels, and make something that feels big. Or at least that's how I would make it. Would you play it? What ideas would you change? Make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below on how you would make a Total War 40K game. And as always, thanks for watching.